advice is scant. A more fundamental doubt is whether one should accept dinner in the first place.
There is no doubt that a person's charms are less frequently a cause of love than a remark, such as, "No, this evening I shan't be free."
If this response proves bewitching, it is because of the connection made in Noah's case between appreciation and absence. The dinner rebuff being the dating equivalent of 40 days at sea. No, just before love, and not for any starched reasons, simply because he didn't feel it was a good idea to sleep together when falling in love was a consideration.
Women who are to some extent resistant, whom one cannot possess at once, whom one does not even know whether one will ever possess, are the only interesting ones.
The prostitute is in an unfortunate position in the Proustian theory of desire, because she both wishes to entice a man and yet is commercially prevented from doing what is most likely to encourage him, namely, tell him she is not free tonight.
If prostitutes attract us so little, it is not because they are less beautiful than other women, but because they are ready and waiting, because they already offer us precisely what we seek to attain.
He merely thought that humans were missing an anatomical part with which to perform the act properly. In the Proustian scheme, it is impossible to love someone physically. Given the coyness of his age, he limited himself to the disappointment of kissing.
Man, a creature clearly less rudimentary than the sea urchin, or even the whale, nevertheless lacks a certain number of essential organs, and particularly possesses none that will serve for kissing. For this absent organ he substitutes his lips, and perhaps he thereby achieves a result slightly more satisfying than caressing his beloved with a horny tusk.
Infidelity. Not the act itself, but the threat of it. For Proust, an injection of jealousy is the only thing capable of rescuing a relationship ruined by habit.
When you come to live with a woman, you will soon cease to see anything of what made you love her. Though it is true that the two sundered elements can be reunited by jealousy. Afraid of losing her, we forget all the others. Or sure of keeping her, we compare her to those others whom at once we prefer to her.
Perhaps we have now said too much. After all, there are limits to how far we can ignore the lessons of perhaps the wisest person in Proust's book, a certain Madame Leroy, who, when asked for her views on love, replies curtly, "Love, I make it often, but I never talk about it."
Up until he was 28, Proust had done nothing with his life. He was still living at home. He had never earned any money. He was always ill. And worst of all, he had been trying to write a novel for the last 4 years, and it was showing no signs of being completed. Something I can sympathize with.
That autumn, Proust fell in love with Ruskin's descriptive works on the great cathedrals. In Ruskin, he found experiences which he had never been more than semi-conscious of raised and beautifully assembled in language. Later, explaining what Ruskin had taught him, Proust pointed to one particular stone figure which Ruskin had described in precise detail.
I would never have been clever enough to find you amongst the thousands of stones, to pick out your figure, to rediscover your personality, to summon you, to make you live again.
It was a symbol of what Ruskin had done for Proust, and what all books might do for their readers. That is, to bring back to life from the deadness caused by habit and inattention valuable yet neglected aspects of experience.
The mediocre usually imagine that to let ourselves be guided by the books we admire robs our faculty of judgment of part of its independence. But there is no better way of coming to be aware of what one feels oneself than by trying to recreate in oneself what a master has felt.
Proust is quite unusual in that he spent most of his life writing books and reading them, and yet he was very aware that actually books can be quite dangerous for you, and that at a certain point it's quite important to put books aside, to put them down. And the reason he thought this was because books can never give expression to enough of what we actually feel, so that if we use them as our guides, if we use them as almost religious instruction, the kinds of sources of all our enlightenment, then we'll miss out a lot of things that are actually going on in our lives.
Good books allow us to see the role, at once essential, yet limited, that reading may play in our spiritual lives. For the author, they may be conclusions. For the reader, incitements. We feel very strongly that our own wisdom begins where that of the author leaves off. And we would like him to provide us with answers, when all he is able to do is provide us with desires.
The moral, that there can be no greater homage we could pay to Proust than to end up passing the same verdict on him as he passed on Ruskin, namely that for all its qualities, his work must eventually also prove silly, maniacal, constraining, false, and ridiculous for those who spend too long on it.
To make reading into a discipline is to give too large a role to what is only an incitement. Reading is on the threshold of the spiritual life. It can introduce us to it. It does not constitute it.
Even the finest books deserve to be thrown aside.